an appreciative attitude, an attitude that says, I'm so happy to be alive, I'm so happy that I have the chance to do the things that I get to do. Right? Paragraph 37, he talks about false prayer, which leads to regrets. He says you should help the sufferer, not sympathy. Actions are greater than sympathy. In other words, altruism, if it's only simply words, is useless. We often, he says, need, quote, a rough electric shock when we are helping people. Again, we think about the definition of education in Plato's cave allegory, being dragged by the hair out of the darkness of the cave into the light of the sun. Fear and pain are always going to be a part of that, right? The self-helping man, he says, well, the secret of fortune is joy in our hands. It's a great line. Paragraph number 38, he says that creeds are also a problem for us. And we're thinking here, of course, about the Divinity School address, right? He even quotes this great line from Exodus 20:19. He said that the people said, "Let not God speak to us but you." And he says that this is the problem. In that moment when we say we can't speak directly to God, that we can't speak without some kind of mediator, whether it be Moses or some kind of priest or preacher or even Jesus, as he says in the Divinity School address. Well, here all of a sudden we've got problems, right? And then he says it in paragraph 38. It will happen for a time, he says. It will happen for a time that the pupil will feel a real debt to the teacher, will find his intellectual power has grown by the study of his writings. This will continue until he has exhausted his master's mind. But in all unbalanced minds, the classification is idolized, passes for the end and not for a speedily exhaustible means, so that the walls of the system blend to their eye in the remote horizon with the walls of the universe. The luminaries of heaven seem to them hung on the arch their master built. They cannot imagine how you aliens have any right to see, how you can see. It must be somehow that you have stole the light from us. They do not yet perceive that light, unsystematic, indomitable, will break into any cabin, even into theirs. Let them chirp a while and call it their own. If they are honest and do well presently, their neat new penfold will be too straight and low, will crack, will lean, will rot and vanish, and the immortal light, all young and joyful, million-orbed, million-colored, will beam over the universe as on the first morning. This is what, of course, we often will refer to in integralist philosophy as the idea of transcend and include. Take what people give to you, whatever it is that they're trying for you to learn. Teachers of all kinds. Listen and, of course, decide whether it really does resonate with who and what you want and who and what you are. But sooner or later, all of the reading, all of the study has to lead you to your own work, your own creation. That's an important step for you, right? Well, we continue now with paragraph 39. The second revolution is in education, and it has everything to do with views of travel. Now, let's point this out. Emerson loved to travel. He spent a lot of time traveling, and in fact, in the Harvard Classics volume 5, we will end with a text called English Traits, musings on his travels. But he makes some observations about how to travel. The soul is no traveler. The wise man stays at home with the soul, and when his necessities, his duties on any occasion call him from his house or into foreign lands, he is at home still and is not gadding about abroad from himself, and shall make men sensible by the expression of his countenance that he goes, the missionary of wisdom and virtue, and visits cities and men like a sovereign and not like an interloper or a valet. In other words, when you travel, take yourself with you. This is an interesting idea. That is to say, everywhere you go, there you are. He makes the observation that it's kind of sad, but you have people who think that they're going to somehow, get away from themselves. This is the way he says it as he begins. Traveling, he says, paragraph 41, is a fool's paradise. We owe to our first journeys the discovery that place is nothing. At home, I dream that at Naples, at Rome, I can be intoxicated with beauty and lose my sadness. I pack my trunk, embrace my friends, embark on the sea, and at last wake up in Naples, and there beside me is the stern fact, the sad self, unrelenting, identical, that I fled from. I seek the Vatican and the palaces. I affect to be intoxicated with sights and suggestions, but I am not intoxicated. My giant goes with me wherever I go. if you travel, he says, to try and get away from yourself, everywhere you go, there you are. But if you can take yourself with you in earnest, then your traveling can be instructional, right? In paragraph 42, he introduces us to revolution number 3, the arts. And he asks artists, why lean and follow the past? Why copy? We think immediately of those opening lines of Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. Howard Rourke, the young architecture student, refuses to just copy what has been accepted as the great model, right? Paragraph 43, he says, insist on yourself. Never imitate, he says. He says it this way, where is the master who could have taught Shakespeare? Where is the master who could have instructed Franklin? We gave a lecture on Ben Franklin. Or Washington, or Bacon. We gave lectures on Francis Bacon. Or Newton. Every great man is a unique. The Scipioism of Scipio is precisely that part he could not borrow. If anybody will tell me whom the great man imitates in the original crisis when he performs a great act, I will tell him who else than himself can teach him. And then an amazing line. Some of you will smile. Shakespeare will never be made by the study of Shakespeare. Compelling. Well, then why would we study Shakespeare? Why study anything? Why study Emerson? Again, back to the argument that we're making here. Not to imitate, but to emulate. We take what we can find that's beneficial. I would say it this way. From all the talk of this lecture, if you can come up with one idea that resonates for you, this has been worth your time. It's not a waste of your time, right? That is to say, we should think about why it is we study anything and then grow. Okay, let's finish now. Paragraph 44 is the final revolution. That is to say, society and technology. Paragraph 45, society, says, never advances. Humans advance, not society, right? And you have an interesting word picture here. He makes the distinction between the Kiwi of New Zealand, who can take a chop by a sword or an axe and somehow survive it, and the American who's so soft that he cannot. Well, this is, of course, probably hyperbole and overstatement, but it does remind us of Rousseau's notion of the noble savages, it's sometimes referred to, right, in that myth of the romantic native, right, in Rousseau's Social Contract. But I think it's a compelling idea, at least, to consider the differences between the soft and the hard. It's an interesting question. Has your education somehow made you softer instead of harder, stronger? Are you more independent because of your time in school? Many students report, it's almost like I've turned into a zombie. The bell rings, I get up, I walk to my next class, I go to my holding pen, I wait for the bell to ring, and I do this day after day, week after week, year after year, and I'm beginning to kind of lose my capacity of any kind of sense of joy through this course of my day. If you want to argue that that's the nature of school and an institution, Emerson would say, you're only half right, because you have a choice. This is the point of free will. You have a choice of how it is you decide to use the time that you have and to be where you are, right? In passage 46, he will continue then by saying it this way. The civilized man, this is an oft-quoted line, the civilized man has built a coach but has lost the use of his feet. He is supported on crutches but lacks so much support of muscle. He has got a fine Geneva watch, but he's lost the skill to tell the hour by the sun. A Greenwich nautical almanac he has, and so being sure of the information when he wants it, the man in the street does not know a star in the sky. And again, we think about Whitman and his learned astronomer. Some students have said that they think about that show that they watched when they were kids called Wall-E, where the people are so lackadaisical that they no longer have strong bones and they just kind of sit around and they do, like, drink Slurpees or something like that. It's a very Emersonian idea. If our education makes us weak and frail, if our education is not dynamic and strong, there's something wrong with our education. I've often say to teachers when I speak with teachers, there has to be a struggle. There has to be a fight that's ongoing. But it's got to be a struggle that's joy-filled. It's got to be compelling. It's got to be exciting. And if it's not exciting, then students' curiosity begins to die. And of course, that one's dangerous as well, right? His next observation in paragraph 47, he says, he talks about the great man theory. He borrows this from Carlyle. He talks about Socrates and Galileo and Napoleon. Emerson loves to say that if you really want to grow, read biography. Now, Plutarch's Lives is a classic example, and it was for Emerson's day. We'll see Plutarch in our study of Harvard Classics. The idea is that if you look at great people who have somehow overcome all of the struggles and have made it, that is good work for us. Reading biography. I was just recently asked, I'm going into business, what's the first thing I should do? And I said, I think you should just read some good biographies. Read stories of lives of people. Read the life of Abe Lincoln. Read the life of Teddy Roosevelt. Read the life of, and on and on and on it goes, John Adams. The list is amazing. And when you read about these amazing people, you can, of course, remember they worked hard to get what they got. Paragraph 48, he says, society is a wave, right? And in paragraph 48, he says it this way. A cultivated man becomes ashamed of his property, ashamed of what he has, out of a new respect for his being. Especially he hates what he has if he sees that it's accidental, came to him by inheritance or gift or crime. Then he feels that it is not having, it does not belong to him, has no root in him, and merely lies there because no revolution or no robber takes it away. But that which a man is, does always by necessity acquire. And what the man acquires is permanent and living property. Now the irony, of course, and we have to point this out, is that Emerson himself inherited money so that he could live off of the death of his wife. Having said that, though, I think there is a legitimate point here to be made. If you cheat to gain your grades, you cannot feel good about the grades that you've gained. You may be able to feel good that you are able to easily get the grade, but you cannot feel good about that moment and about the fact that people assume about you something that is not true. Go back to, of course, Crane's Red Badge of Courage. Those fellows of Henry's thought he had done something great in battle. He let them think that he couldn't live with himself. That is that inner voice of the second box that Emerson is talking about. Well, in paragraph 48, he talks about society as being a wave, and here he will say it. He says he says that the persons who make up a nation today die, and their experience with them. In other words, he says it. There's this notion that one never really is able to hold society in place. It's always moving. It's a wave, if you will. Passage 49, he says, this is his critique of property. It's going to remind us of some of the things that Marx says. It can begin to own us. And of course, this is that point that we were just reading from passage 49, that a cultivated man begins to realize that true property is who you are, not what you possess. Of course, after he says this, he comments about how he hates party politics for this very reason, because politics, he says, is often built to try to protect property, and of course, like Socrates, he has serious problems with that one. Finally, paragraph number 49, he will finish with some observation. He who knows that power is in the soul, that he is weak only because he has looked for good out of him and elsewhere, and so perceiving throws himself unhesitatingly on his thought, instantly rights himself, stands in the erect position. Again, we're back to Milton and the fact that Adam walks erect, commands his limbs, works miracles, just as a man who stands on his feet is stronger than a man who stands on his head. And then finally, to finish paragraph 50, so use all that is called fortune. Most men gamble with her and gain all and lose all as her wheel rolls. But do thou leave as unlawful these winnings and deal with cause and effect, the chancellors of God. In the will, work and acquire, and thou hast chained the wheel of chance and shalt always drag her after thee. Chance favors the prepared mind, Louis Pasteur said, right? A political victory, a rise of rents, the recovery of your sick, or the return of your absent friend, or some other quite external event raises your spirits and you think, good days are preparing for me. Do not believe it. It can never be so. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. I love that the word principles is the final word of this essay. In other words, the only way you'll ever know joy is to live the life you choose to live. But that is a very demanding prospect. Let's turn now to level 2A and some messages, themes here to finish. Of course, one, we just mentioned it, is the idea of trust yourself. Don't always be a follower. Of course, secondly, don't feel sorry for other people's pain. Do something to actually fix it. A compelling idea. And finally, the idea, accept being misunderstood, right? And this notion of a foolish consistency as the hobgoblin of little minds. Those are some messages. There's many, many more. You come up with your own. Level 2B, rhetoric. Think about the hyperbole or the exaggeration, right? Oftentimes, Emerson will overstate to make a point. He will say something controversial, and then, of course, he'll challenge you to think about what he really means, right? His love of word pictures or symbols comes to mind. What was your favorite? We just said society is a wave. You can almost see that, like, tidal wave, the way in which that can affect what is happening. There's so many beautiful symbols here. I love the one about the rose. Looking at a rose is that beautiful present moment in time. Note how he sets up his argument, too. He begins almost like good advertisers do by talking about why self-reliance is important, and then he begins to talk about the challenge of living it both as the individual and then how it will affect society. At level 3A, in our conversation with other texts in the world, of course, his love of Plato, it's self-evident, especially that cave allegory of Republic 7. His love of course, Moses and Milton as being symbolic, iconographic of different types of powerful artists and leaders. Of course, his views of Shakespeare and why we should study Shakespeare or any of the great thinkers, not so that we can imitate, but rather so we can emulate, so we can move beyond them, right? And then finally, the question, what is your favorite movie about an individual who stands alone and is therefore heroic, self-reliant, we might say? Finally, level 3B, how do you relate this text to yourself? Can you think, for example, in your own writing, can you think about a time you trusted yourself and stood up and it worked out? Can you think about a time when you didn't? And what can you learn from an experience like that? Can you demand more of yourself, in other words? Finally, let's ask this question, what's dangerous about this philosophy, especially if it's misunderstood? It can be the license for a lot of negative activity, and the individual can defend himself or herself by simply saying, hey, it's what my conscience tells me to do. My conscience tells me to be really mean to certain kinds of people I don't like. Well, this is going to be for Emerson a real challenging, thorny, sticky point. Of course, in other essays, we're going to hear him try to respond to the ethical question, right? He'll usually fall back on Kant's categorical imperative, what we call sometimes the golden rule, right? Act in such a way that your actions could be generalized to the entire population. I'll let you guys grapple with it. Well, there it is, Self-Reliance. Let's turn next in the Harvard Classics, Volume 5, to Emerson's essay, also from 1841, Compensation. We'll be back to talk about that one. I hope that this essay has challenged you, and best of luck in your studies. Thank you.